Coming up on this Thursday edition of Daybreak, some 80 South Koreans will travel to the North Mount Kumgang on this Thursday to reunite with their war-divided family members for the first time in more than 60 years. Following the worst violence in Ukraine's post-Soviet history, President Viktor Yanukovych replaces the chief of his armed forces. At least 26 people are dead from the latest clashes between anti-government protesters and security forces. Plus, Korea's figure skating queen Kim Yuna inches closer to back-to-back Olympic golds after placing first after the women's short program with a score of 74.92. Daybreak begins now.
Thanks for joining us. You're watching Daybreak on Thursday, February 20th. I'm Choi Yusan in Seoul. South and North Korea will resume reunions of war-torn families on this Thursday for the first time in more than 3 years. Ahead of the landmark event, dozens of elderly South Koreans gathered near the inter-Korean border to ready themselves for the reunions. Our Moon Geon-young reports from Seokcho.
83-year-old Chang Chun will meet his brother on Thursday for the first time in 63 years, a sibling he thought was dead until a few years ago. They'll reunite for the first time since the Korean War tore apart their family.
This will be the first and the last time for me to meet my brother. 63 years have passed already. Considering how long I have to live, this will be my only chance.
He is one of the 82 elderly South Koreans who gathered in a resort near the eastern port city of Seokcho on Wednesday, one day before they'll be crossing the heavily fortified border only 50 kilometers away into North Korea. It will be the first reunion in more than 3 years for the peninsula's divided families. The South Korean Red Cross had initially arranged meetings for 83 South Koreans, but one had to bow out due to health problems. This has only highlighted the fact that time is running out for the peninsula's divided families, and the chief of the South Korean Red Cross is fully aware.
Originally, 83 separated family members were supposed to come, but one had health issues, so the total number now stands at 82. 26 of them are over the age of 90. It has been 3 years and 4 months since the last encounter with our northern delegates, and this will provide us the opportunity to meet face-to-face and share our opinions on a humanitarian basis.
Earlier in the day, the reunion participants went through health checkups conducted by the medical staff that will be traveling with them to North Korea and received a brief lecture on the do's and don'ts while meeting with their relatives in North Korea. At about 8 a.m. Thursday morning, the 82 South Koreans and their families will board a bus and leave for the cross-border transit office in Gosung, which is about an hour-and-a-half drive from here, and then cross into North Korea at 10 a.m. Korea time. The reunion set to begin at 3 in the afternoon will be bittersweet, as the chances of any of these divided family members meeting again are slim, if not none. Moon Geon-young, Arirang News, Seokcho.
With the inter-Korean family reunions and a recent UN panel report accusing North Korea of crimes against humanity, greater attention has been drawn towards the human rights situation inside the reclusive regime. And a South Korean parliamentary committee on Wednesday discussed the pending bills related to protecting the rights of the North Korean people. Kim Young-gil has more.
Lawmakers from the ruling Saenuri Party and the main opposition Democratic Party showed clear differences over pending North Korean human rights bills at Wednesday's Foreign Affairs and Unification Committee. The Saenuri Party's full leader, Choi Kyung-hwan, said passage should come sooner rather than later.
The North Korean human rights bill should be passed as soon as possible. The UN has already urged North Korea to stop violating people's rights and for China to stop the repatriation of North Korean refugees. We should be the ones at the forefront.
The two parties have each submitted 5 bills since 2005, calling for measures that would improve the lives of the North Korean people. The Zhenmen Party's proposals have mainly called for documenting the human rights situation in North Korea, supporting human rights activities, and helping groups that aid North Korean defectors. The DP's proposals have focused more on supporting cooperation between the South and North and providing humanitarian aid. While Democratic Party lawmaker Chung Chang-nae welcomed the discussions on the bills, he said the timing was inappropriate.
Both parties should go ahead and talk about the pending bills, but legislating them may affect North Korea's attitude towards South Korea, especially at a time when we are going ahead with the family reunions, and relations with North Korea are improving.
Political analysts say the opposition party's stance reflects concerns that a hardline approach to the North Korean human rights situation could anger Pyongyang and worsen relations. Although the parliamentary committee lawmakers did not agree on legislating the bills just yet, they did agree to proceed with fine-tuning them. The U.S. and Japan adopted legislation on the North Korean human rights situation in 2004 and 2006, respectively. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
North Korea has detained yet another foreigner, this time an Australian missionary. 75-year-old John Short's wife told Reuters that he was arrested by Pyongyang's Public Security Bureau on Sunday. Short was reportedly questioned about handing out religious pamphlets printed in Korean. Australia, which does not have diplomatic relations with North Korea, is using its embassy in Seoul and the Swedish embassy in Pyongyang to look into the case. Pyongyang has been holding Korean-American missionary Kenneth Bae in custody for more than a year now on charges he was trying to overthrow the North Korean regime. A top Chinese official who visited Pyongyang this week is scheduled to arrive in Seoul later on this Thursday, raising speculation that progress is being made in international efforts to denuclearize North Korea. An official at the South's Foreign Ministry confirmed Chinese Vice Foreign Minister Liu Zhenmen's 3-day visit to Seoul until Saturday, where he will meet with a number of officials here, including the chief negotiator to the six-party nuclear talks. Liu's trip to Pyongyang has been closely watched, especially since it came after the top diplomats of Beijing and Washington recently said they exchanged proposals on ways to spur the North to disarm its nuclear weapons. And whatever was discussed between the two ministers was likely relayed to Pyongyang by Liu, and he is expected to give details of his North Korea trip in Seoul. The first group of 15 Korean survivors from a bus bombing in northeastern Egypt over the weekend returned home Wednesday evening. The Egyptian government is taking precaution after the Islamist militant group responsible for the attacks has threatened to take further attacks against all tourists in Sinai Peninsula. Kim Hyun-bin reports.
The Egyptian government says it is doing all it can to protect tourists in the wake of a threat by an al-Qaeda-linked Islamist militant group for all tourists to leave the country by Thursday or be subject to further attacks. The government said it is not sure of the authenticity of the threat posted on a Twitter account affiliated with the group, but said it has taken extra precautions. Egyptian Prime Minister Hassan al-Bolkiah said on state television that the group Ansar Beit al-Maqdis is becoming a threat to foreign tourists in the country. The Islamist group claims to be responsible for the suicide attack on Sunday that killed 4 people, including 3 Koreans and an Egyptian. The Korean government has issued a travel warning for the Sinai Peninsula and is working to find out whether there are still any Korean tourists in the region. The Korean Foreign Ministry says it is doing all it can to uncover the motive for the attack.
We are working with the Egyptian government and the international community to learn the reasons behind the attack.
Korean government officials dispatched to the scene after the attack are currently working to help the Koreans who survived the attack and ensure they get home safely. The first group of 15 survivors arrived in Korea on Wednesday, while the other half are scheduled to return home on Thursday. As for the 3 Korean nationals who died, their families are currently in Egypt and will return to Korea with their bodies soon. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
Yet another Korean tourist has been murdered abroad, this time in the Philippines. The Korean embassy in Manila says a 65-year-old man, identified only by his surname, Ha, was shot several times Tuesday by two gunmen riding a motorcycle in the city of Angeles. Ha was on his way to his hotel at the time with three friends who fled the scene and escaped unharmed. Local authorities have opened an investigation into the case, but they don't yet have any suspects or a motive. The Korean embassy says there have been several cases in recent months where Koreans residing in the Philippines were kidnapped or killed, but this is the first murder of a Korean tourist.
If you want the latest news from Korea and around the world.
Return to the negotiation.
President Park Geun-hye plans, given the current circumstances.
On your way to work or at home.
Defense Ministry. The legislature will convene a...
Tune into Daybreak on Arirang TV.
Prime Minister Shinzo Abe said Tuesday. With the housing market here in the nation sputtering along, the Land Ministry has some ideas about how to get it back on track. Ministry officials laid out their plans in a status report to the president on Wednesday. Our Kim Ji-yeon has the details.
During a policy briefing on Wednesday, the Ministry of Land, Maritime and Environment called for revitalizing the housing market by easing restrictions. The pitch included a number of measures. Regarding the reconstruction of houses, the Land Ministry said there is a need to scale back on some of the policies imposed back in 2006 that were put into place to quell housing speculation. That could include abolishing a policy that requires homeowners to pay back some of the profits gained from rising house prices after renovations. Limiting a household to buying just one house in some areas of the Seoul metropolitan area would also no longer apply. The ministry also wants to ease the eligibility for government-backed mortgage loans to include more home buyers. First-time buyers are currently only eligible for loans that have interest rates in the 1% range. But with the change, those who have not owned a house for 5 years would be eligible as well. The ministry aims to make public rental housing available to 90,000 households this year and to 500,000 households by the year 2017. The set of measures is being introduced in part to counter soaring housing rental prices that have risen since 2008. The goal is to ease the imbalance between supply and demand in Jeonse, a rental system unique to Korea that requires one large lump sum deposit. The task of boosting the nation's faltering housing market has been a major issue for economic policymakers, as more than half of Korean households' assets are in real estate. And because of that, many fear that the ailing housing market could have a negative impact on the nation's consumption, which makes up a majority of the nation's gross domestic product. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Korea's export-driven economy is still being driven by 6 industries, while growth in other sectors remains flat in recent years. Our Connie Kim reports.
Korean exports are still driven by the 6 industries that power the country's economy, while growth in other industries has remained stagnant. Local market researcher CEO Score said Wednesday the combined annual overseas sales of 133 companies from 2011 through the third quarter of 2013 was more than $421 billion. Of the total, 94% of the company's overseas sales came from Korea's 6 main export industries: IT and electronics, automobiles, construction, petrochemicals, shipbuilding, and steel. During the same period, however, the telecommunications, pharmaceutical, and transportation industries saw their overseas sales remain flat. CEO Score representative Park Ju-geun said the 6 major industries are crucial to the export-driven Korean economy and added that companies need to invest more to stay competitive.
Exports of IT products and automobiles are expected to continue to grow, while it may take the shipbuilding industry, which is especially highly dependent on global economic trends, more time to recover.
Samsung Group had the highest proportion of overseas sales, which represented more than 70% of its total sales from 2011 to 2013, followed by LG and Kumho Asiana. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
A consortium of Korean engineering firms has won a contract worth about $6 billion to build an oil refinery in Iraq. The joint venture led by Hyundai Engineering and Construction is made up of 4 builders, including GS E&C and SK E&C. The refinery will be built in Karbala, some 120 kilometers southwest of Baghdad, with construction expected to take 4.5 years. The multi-billion-dollar order is the single largest industrial plant project won by Korean firms. The differences that divide Korea and Japan are very clear to those at the center, but it may not be the case for the outside world. To give the global advanced audience a better understanding of where Korea is coming from, the government and civic groups are getting proactive to improve Korea's brand image. Our Kwon So-ah reports on an exhibition leading the change.
Hundreds of people, mainly students, gathered Wednesday at the opening of the exhibition Brand Image Up, hosted by Yonhap News Agency and the Voluntary Agency Network of Korea, or VANK. The so-called cyber diplomatic organization uses its time promoting the country and improving Korea's brand image globally. They focus on reporting the truth about issues like Japan's claims to Korea's Dokdo Island, the naming of the East Sea, and the women forced into sexual slavery by the Japanese military during World War II.
As I'm Korean, I want other people, not even South Korean, but other foreigners to know what is right about South Korea, and that's what I'm volunteering for.
I believe that informing foreigners about our country is the best way to improve Korea's status.
Park Ki-tae, the founder of VANK, which has 12,000 members, says his dream to give the world a better understanding of Korea began with a pen pal letter. One of Park's foreign friends told him that maps abroad identify Korea's East Sea as the Sea of Japan and refer to Korea's Dokdo Island by what the Japanese call it Takeshima.
So I've been upset. So I sent email. This is wrong. Sea of Japan is wrong. Takeshima is wrong. It's Dokdo and East Sea.
To bring about change, VANK began to send letters to foreign media outlets and foreign governments asking that they change their textbooks and maps. Korean singer Kim Jang-hoon, who is a member of VANK, expressed his thoughts on improving Korea's brand image.
Although I am a singer, I founded a website called truthoftokdo.com and also an application. We shouldn't fight with foreigners about Dokdo, but prove it in a logical way by showing them evidence.
The exhibition runs through February 25th at the National Museum of Korea, aiming to spread the idea that all Koreans are ambassadors representing their nation. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
Western powers are preparing to slap sanctions on Ukraine over the deaths of 26 people in the worst violence since Ukraine's independence from the Soviet Union. European Union leaders say they're urgently preparing sanctions such as asset freezes and visa bans against officials responsible for the bloody crackdown. President Viktor Yanukovych, however, will not be on the list to keep channels of dialogue open. The U.S. is planning similar steps. President Yanukovych on Wednesday denounced the latest violence as an attempted coup, and he sacked the head of his armed forces without explaining the reason behind his decision. Thousands of demonstrators have been rallying since November, when Yanukovych backed out of a trade deal with the EU in favor of closer ties with Russia.
The wait is over as we finally got a chance to watch Kim Yeon-ah compete in the women's figure skating event in Sochi. And she didn't disappoint as she delivered what Michelle Kwan described as breathtaking. And as the figure queen performed in her last Olympic short program of her illustrious career, she scores a season-best 74.92, good for first overall. And despite it being lower than her Vancouver score of 78.50, her performance left many experts speechless as she hopes to claim her second straight gold on day 13. Meanwhile, Park So-yeon finished with 49.14 and Kim Hae-jin finished with a final score of 54.37. And staying with the women's figure skating event, while Kim Yeon-ah shined on ice, all eyes were on Yulia Nymnyshkaya of Russia and Mao Asada of Japan once the figure queen's performance was over. And despite it being considered Kim Yeon-ah's biggest threat, Nymnyshkaya falls in one of her jumps and was deducted a point. And with that, the final score of 65.23 was far lower than her team figure skating result as she finishes 5th overall. And as for Mao Asada going very last in the event, she falls in one of her jumps once again as she scores just 55.51 in her short program, good for 16th overall. Meanwhile, it was another Russian skater who came neck and neck with Kim Yeon-ah as Alina Sonyakova scores 74.64, just short of Kim Yeon-ah's final score. And while women's figure skating consists of some of the youngest Olympians, one Olympian proved that age doesn't matter when it comes to the Olympics as Ole Einar Bjørndalen became the most decorated Winter Olympian of all time. And now after helping Norway win the first Olympic mixed relay in biathlon, he won his 13th medal at the Winter Games, becoming the most decorated Winter Olympian of all time. The 40-year-old has now won 8 gold medals, 4 silvers, and a bronze, and has a shot at another medal on Saturday. And speaking of making history, U.S. bobsledder Lauren Williams made history on day 12 after becoming the 5th athlete to win both the Summer and Winter Games medal. After winning a gold medal with the U.S. track relay team in London, Williams competes in the 2-man bobsleigh event and wins a silver medal for Team USA as she becomes just the 5th athlete to win both the Summer and Winter Games medals. And finally, taking a look at the medal count so far after 12 days of competition in Sochi. Of course, if we take a look at here, we have a new first place here. Norway in first place now after adding another gold medal for a total of 9. Germany still with 8 gold medals in second, with the U.S. in third, followed by Russia and the Netherlands. Meanwhile, Korea drops down to 16th overall with 2 gold, 1 silver, and 1 bronze medal. And that's going to wrap it up for me. This has been SJ. Have a great rest of the day and see you guys again for your sports needs.
Good Thursday morning to you. I'm Lee with your latest weather forecast. Now, the weather has been so generous in the afternoon lately, and it looks like early spring weather will continue to dominate today. The whole nation could expect a tad milder condition than yesterday. Also, partly cloudy skies will turn to sunny skies as we go through the day. But in the meantime, snow will redevelop in Gangwon-do and parts of east from the late afternoon with the accumulation of 7 centimeters at the most till tomorrow morning. Also, it will snow in Mount Keungang in the morning hours. Now, the forecast remains unchanged this week. Similar weather pattern is in store across the region, though morning lows will stay in the minus side. So please dress accordingly to avoid getting sick from temperature fluctuation. And if you have planned to be outdoor this weekend, the weather will cooperate to make your weekend more enjoyable. With that, here are the readings for today. The morning low in Seoul is at -2, but will get up to 6. While Daegu will see a high of 9 and Busan will top out at 10 this afternoon. Now let's see how other regions are looking. It looks like Jeju will climb up to 8 and Mount Keungang will remain on the freezing side with top temperature topping out at -8 today. Now that's all for Korea, and here's the global forecast for viewers around the world. Enjoy your morning commute and hope you have a wonderful day.
And those are the stories we have for you at this hour. Thank you for being with us.